The barn door hinges screamed in protest against the bitter cold. 20 below, and the wind had teeth that bit through layers of wool and leather. Nathaniel Morgan raised his lantern higher, the yellow light barely pushing back against the darkness. Something had disturbed the horses, something beyond the howling February wind. He moved slowly, his breath clouding for him. The smell of hay dust and horse sweat hung heavy in the frozen air. His Winchester rifle rested comfortably in his left hand, not raised but ready. 5 years on this isolated Wyoming ranch had taught him caution. A soft scraping sound came from the feed corner. Nathaniel swung the lantern toward it, illuminating 2 small figures huddled against the grain bins. 2 little girls, no more than 9 years old, froze in the sudden light. One clutched a burlap sack of oats to her chest. The other had stuffed her dress pockets with grain, her hands shaking so badly she kept dropping it on the packed dirt floor. Their faces, smudged with dirt and hollow with hunger, stared back at him with wide-eyed, terrified eyes. The taller one stepped in front of her sister. Red curls poked out from beneath a torn woolen scarf. Despite her fear, her chin jutted forward defiantly. "Please don't tell Uncle Maxwell," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind rattling the barn walls. "He said if we eat his food again, he'll put us on the orphan train." The smaller girl swayed suddenly, her eyes rolling back. She crumpled before Nathaniel could move, collapsing in a heap of threadbare cotton and fragile bones. Nathaniel dropped his rifle and lunged forward, catching the child just before her head cracked against the frozen ground. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, just skin stretched over a delicate frame. Her skin felt like creek ice against his palms. "Rose!" The other girl fell to her knees beside them. "Elizabeth, wake up!" "Oh, she's breathing," Nathaniel said, pressing 2 fingers to the child's neck. The pulse fluttered weakly beneath his touch. His hands remembered this motion from another life, and he felt a familiar trembling start in his fingertips. "When's she last eaten?" 3 days. The red-haired girl's voice broke. "Uncle said we didn't earn supper, said we were thieves." Nathaniel looked at the burlap sack in her arms. Horse feed. They'd been eating horse feed. "Get up," he said, shifting the unconscious child more securely in his arms. "Both of you inside now." "But Uncle ain't here yet." "Move." Nathaniel's voice left no room for argument. He strode toward the house, boots crunching through the fresh snow. The girl hesitated, then grabbed the grain sack and followed. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. Nathaniel laid the little one on his worn sofa near the hearth and threw 2 logs onto the embers. Smoke curled upward, then flames caught, sending the smell of pine sap through the room. "What's your name?" He pulled a wool blanket from the back of a chair. "Abigail." She was staring at her sister, hands twisting in that expensive-looking scarf around her neck. It didn't match the rest of her clothes. The scarf had silver thread worked into the edges. "She's Elizabeth. We're twins." "I can see that." Nathaniel tucked the blanket around Elizabeth. Her eyelids fluttered, but didn't open. "Abigail, there's milk in the coal box. Bread in the tin on the counter. Get it." She didn't move. "I ain't going to hurt you." He met her eyes, brown eyes that looked too old for a 9-year-old face. "But your sister needs food, real food, not horse grain." Abigail's chin trembled. Then she ran for the kitchen. Nathaniel knelt beside the sofa. Elizabeth's breathing was shallow. Her hands were red and raw from the cold, frostbite starting at the fingertips. 5 years ago, he'd knelt like this beside another small body. His newborn son, born too early, lungs too weak to sustain life. Rebecca had held the baby for 6 hours after his birth before he stopped breathing in her arms. She'd followed him 2 weeks later. Heart gave out from grief, the doctor said. His hands remembered warming cold skin, remembered praying to a God who didn't answer. He shook his head. "Not now." Abigail returned with a tin cup of milk and half a loaf of bread. Her hands shook so badly the milk sloshed over the rim. "Give it here." Nathaniel took the cup and lifted Elizabeth's head gently. "Elizabeth, wake up now. You've got a drink." The girl's eyes opened, unfocused and glassy. "That's it. Small sips." He tipped the cup to her lips. "Slow. Don't gulp it." She drank like she was drowning. Milk ran down her chin. When the cup was empty, she started crying, silent, shaking sobs that made no sound. "Shh." Nathaniel didn't know what else to do, so he broke off a piece of bread and handed it to her. Easy, your stomach ain't used to it. Abigail had already eaten half the loaf. She saw him looking and froze, guilt written across her face. Finish it, Nathaniel said. There's more. There is? Her voice was thick with disbelief. Yeah. He moved to the pantry and returned with another small loaf and some dried apples. This should help you both get your strength back. Abigail stared at the food, then up at him, suspicion battling with hunger in her eyes. Why are you helping us? What do you want? Nathaniel recognized the question for what it was, a child who'd learned the hard way that kindness usually came with conditions. Nothing, he said simply. I was a doctor once. Can't turn away someone who needs help. Uncle Maxwell says everyone wants something, she insisted, chin raised defiantly though her hands trembled. Well, your uncle's wrong about that, Nathaniel replied, turning toward the window. And about a lot of other things, I'd wager. He caught the flicker of relief that crossed her face, a tiny crack in her protective armor, before she ducked her head and continued eating. Through the frost on the glass, he could see the snow falling harder. The wind had picked up, howling around the corners of the house. No one would be traveling in this storm tonight. Elizabeth had stopped crying. She was looking around the room with more awareness now, taking in the sparse furniture, the row of books on the shelf, the medical bag gathering dust in the corner. You're a doctor, she said suddenly. Nathaniel turned sharply. What? You're a doctor, Elizabeth repeated, her voice clearer. I saw it in my dream. You saved lots of people with those hands. An icy finger traced Nathaniel's spine that had nothing to do with the blizzard outside. He hadn't practiced medicine in 5 years. Not since Rebecca and the baby. Not since the war before that. How'd you know that? He asked. Elizabeth just shook her head, her eyes drifting closed again. Abigail was watching him warily, still clutching the bread like it might disappear. Nathaniel moved to the fire, adding another log. You two sleep here tonight. We'll figure the rest out in the morning. Later, when the girls were finally asleep, Abigail curled protectively around her sister on the sofa. Nathaniel sat in his chair by the dying fire. He pulled a worn photograph from his shirt pocket. Rebecca, smiling, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Their future that never came to be. Outside, the blizzard raged on, rattling the windows like angry ghosts. Inside, the crackling fire cast shadows that danced across the faces of the sleeping children. They looked peaceful now, their hunger temporarily sated, their small bodies finally warm. Nathaniel tucked the photograph away and rubbed his hands together. They'd stopped shaking at least. He flexed his fingers, remembering the thousands of wounds they'd stitched, the countless lives they'd tried to save during the war. The day he'd failed to save his own family, he'd packed away his medical bag and never opened it again. Now he wondered if he still had the courage to heal, or if that part of him had died along with Rebecca and their son. 3 sharp knocks on the door jolted him from his thoughts. Who would be out in this storm? Nathaniel rose, checking that the girls were still asleep before reaching for his rifle. Morgan, it's Sullivan! A deep voice called through the howling wind. Open up! Nathaniel relaxed slightly but kept the rifle in hand as he opened the door. Sheriff Emmett Sullivan stood on the porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders. Behind him, the wind howled through the bare cottonwoods. Hell of a night to be riding, Emmett. Nathaniel stepped back to let him in. Wouldn't be if it wasn't important. Sullivan stomped snow from his boots and removed his hat. His face was grim beneath its gray stubble. Got a problem, Nate. Sullivan's eyes moved past him to the sleeping children on the sofa. So it's true. You're harboring Pierce's wards. Pierce's what? Nathaniel set his rifle against the wall. Sullivan reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded document, sealed with red wax. Maxwell Pierce filed guardianship papers for Josiah Fletcher's girls 2 weeks ago. Judge Holloway signed them yesterday. Those children were stealing horse feed, Emmett. They said they hadn't eaten in 3 days. Nathaniel's voice was low but sharp. Look at them. That's what you call proper care? Sullivan's weathered face tightened. He'd been a field surgeon's assistant during the war, serving under Captain Nathaniel Morgan. He'd seen what Nathaniel had seen, done what Nathaniel had done. I don't like it either, Sullivan admitted quietly. But the law says bloodkin has first claim, and Pierce is their uncle who hasn't fed them in 3 days. Nathaniel stepped back and gestured at the sofa. They were eating horse grain, Emmett. Horse grain. Sullivan's jaw tightened as he studied the sleeping children. Even in sleep, their faces looked pinched and hollow. Damn, he muttered, looking away. I'll talk to Pierce. About what? The fact that he's starving his dead cousin's children? Sullivan sighed heavily. It's more complicated than that, Nate. Always is with Pierce. Man owns half the county. Including Judge Holloway? Nathaniel asked pointedly. Sullivan's silence was answer enough. What happened to their parents? Nathaniel asked. Father died in a mining accident 2 months ago. Mother passed from illness about 2 years before that. Sullivan hesitated. There's rumors, though. Pierce has been looking for something connected to Fletcher's mine. What kind of something? Don't know, but he's been asking questions. Sent his man, Vernon Cobb, poking around Fletcher's old place. Sullivan replaced his hat. I can give you 3 days before Pierce comes for the girls. That's it. 3 days isn't enough. It's all I can do, Nate. Sullivan's tone was apologetic but firm. I've got a job to uphold the law, even when I don't like it. And legally, those girls belong with their next of kin. After Sullivan left, Nathaniel stood by the door for a long time, listening to the wind and the soft breathing of the children. He turned to find Abigail awake, watching him with those 2 old eyes. You heard, he said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, her arms tightening around her still sleeping sister. Please don't send us back, she whispered. He'll kill us, like he killed Pa. Nathaniel went very still. What did you just say? Uncle Maxwell pushed Pa down the mine shaft. Abigail's voice was barely audible. I saw him do it. Ma saw too. That's why she had to run away. Your mother's alive? Nathaniel asked, kneeling to meet her eye level. Abigail bit her lip. I don't know. She told us to hide, then she went to find proof about what Uncle Maxwell did. She never came back. And your uncle told you she was dead? The girl nodded. He said we were his now, that nobody would believe us if we told what we saw. Elizabeth stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Abigail stroked her sister's hair, and the smaller girl settled. She can see things sometimes, Abigail said softly. In her dreams. That's how she knew you were a doctor. Nathaniel studied the 2 girls for a long moment. Their faces bore the same features in subtly different arrangements. Abigail's sharper, more wary. Elizabeth's softer, dreamier. Both bore the unmistakable marks of neglect and fear. Get some rest, he said finally. You're safe tonight. As he turned away, Abigail's voice stopped him again. Mr. Morgan, are you going to help us? He looked back at her, this child with ancient eyes who had watched her father die and her mother disappear, who had kept her sister alive by stealing horse feed. Yes, he said, I'm going to help you. The relief that washed over her small face made something deep in his chest ache. Outside, the blizzard continued its assault, but inside, the fire burned steadily, casting its warm light over the sleeping children. Nathaniel Morgan sat watching over them until dawn, his mind turning over what he'd learned and what he'd promised. After 5 years of isolation and grief, he had allowed 2 desperate children into his home, into his life. Whatever came next would change everything, for all of them. Dawn broke clear and frigid. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape and temperatures that made the air itself seem brittle. Nathaniel had barely slept, but he rose with the first light to check on the livestock and break the ice on the water troughs. When he returned to the house, stomping snow from his boots, he found both girls awake. Elizabeth looked better. Some color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes were clearer. Abigail had found the pantry and was carefully slicing bread. Sit down, Nathaniel said. I'll make breakfast. Abigail looked startled, the knife frozen mid-cut. We can cook. Ma taught us. I'm sure she did. But today, you'll eat, then we've got work to do. Nathaniel hung his coat by the door. There's ice needs breaking on the north pond for the cattle. We can help, Elizabeth said eagerly, her voice stronger than the night before. Pa used to let us help at the mine. Abigail shot her sister a warning look that Nathaniel pretended not to see. He fried salt pork and eggs, adding the last of his potatoes. The girls ate like they feared each bite might be their last. though he noticed Abigail sneaking glances at his medical bag in the corner. After breakfast, he bundled them in spare clothes, far too big but warmer than their threadbare dresses, and led them to the frozen pond where his small herd of cattle waited. Ice don't break itself, he told them, handing Abigail a long-handled axe that was nearly as tall as she was. You've got to show up no matter the weather, no matter how you feel. Abigail frowned at the axe, then at him. Why don't you just bring the animals to the creek? Because the creek freezes too, and its banks are steep. Cattle could fall and break a leg. Nathaniel demonstrated the chopping motion. This pond is safe, but the ice gets 3 inches thick overnight. If we don't break it each morning, the cattle can't drink. Elizabeth watched intently. It's like what Ma used to say, that hard things don't solve themselves. You have to keep working at them, even when it seems impossible. Nathaniel glanced at her, surprised. Your Ma sounds like a wise woman. She was, Elizabeth said solemnly. Then so quietly he almost missed it. Is. Abigail took her turn with the axe, her small arms straining with each blow. Nathaniel showed her how to use her weight, not just her strength. My pa taught me to chop wood, she said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise even her. Before he died. Nathaniel nodded, recognizing the tentative offering. He taught you well. Your form is good. By the third swing, she'd found the rhythm, and a smile flickered across her face as the ice cracked. When she finished, she handed the axe back to Nathaniel, their eyes meeting briefly. Pa never let anyone hurt us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, until he couldn't stop it anymore. Nathaniel knelt to her level. I'm sorry about your father, Abigail. He sounds like a good man. She studied him for a long moment, as if measuring his sincerity. He was, she said finally. Then almost inaudibly, thank you for helping Lizzie. She gets sick easy. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a beginning. Elizabeth, too weak to swing the axe, gathered the broken chunks and stacked them neatly at the pond's edge. The cattle approached cautiously, steam rising from their nostrils in the frigid air. We did it, Elizabeth said proudly as the first animal dipped its muzzle into the dark water. Today, Nathaniel corrected, we did it today. Tomorrow, the ice will be back and we'll do it again. Every day? Abigail asked, leaning on the axe. Every day, he confirmed. That's ranch work. That's life. On the walk back to the house, Elizabeth slipped her small hand into his. Nathaniel started at the contact but didn't pull away. Her fingers were tiny against his calloused palm, but surprisingly strong. Dr. Morgan, she said, looking up at him with those uncanny eyes. Ma's coming. I saw it in my dream last night. She's looking for us. Nathaniel glanced at Abigail, who was walking ahead, shoulders hunched against the cold. Your sister seems to think your mom might not be coming back, he said gently. Elizabeth shook her head. Abby's angry because Ma left, but Ma had to go, to find the book, to prove what Uncle Maxwell did. What book? The one with the numbers, about Pa's mine. Elizabeth's face scrunched in concentration. Uncle Maxwell wants it because it shows the gold. Nathaniel stopped walking. Gold? Your pa's mine was gold, not silver. Elizabeth nodded solemnly. It's a secret. Pa only told Ma. Uncle Maxwell found out, and that's why... She broke off, her eyes filling with tears. That's why what, Elizabeth? That's why he pushed Pa. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Down the deep shaft. I saw it in my dream. Abby saw it for real. Ahead, Abigail had turned to wait for them, her face suspicious. What are you telling him, Lizzie? Who is he? What she called? Nothing, Elizabeth answered too quickly. Just about the dreams. Abigail's frown deepened, but she turned and continued toward the house. Nathaniel knelt in the snow, bringing himself to Elizabeth's eye level. Your sister's trying to protect you, he said quietly. She's carrying a heavy burden for someone so young. Elizabeth nodded, her eyes too knowing for a child. You are too, she said, reaching up to touch a beard-roughened cheek. Because of your wife and baby, the ones who went to heaven. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold sank into Nathaniel's bones. How could you know about them? I told you, I see things in my dreams. Elizabeth's expression was solemn, sometimes about people who are gone, sometimes about people who are coming. And your ma's coming? Elizabeth nodded firmly. She promised. and Ma never breaks her promises. The rest of the day passed quietly. Nathaniel showed the girls around the ranch, the small barn with its 4 horses, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and the workshop where he repaired tack and tools. All the while, his mind turned over what Elizabeth had told him. A gold mine, not silver. If true, that would be motive enough for murder. In the afternoon, he gave the girls paper and pencils, watching as Abigail painstakingly practiced her letters while Elizabeth drew pictures, surprisingly detailed for a child, of a woman with long hair and sad eyes. "Is that your ma?" Nathaniel asked, pausing by her work. Elizabeth nodded without looking up. "She's thinking about us. I can feel it." Abigail glanced up from her writing. "Stop it, Lizzie. You're making things up again." "I'm not." Elizabeth's lower lip trembled. "She is coming. I saw it. You see lots of things that aren't real." Abigail snapped, then immediately looked regretful. "I'm sorry, Lizzie. I just don't want you to be disappointed again." Nathaniel recognized the protective instinct in the older twin, the need to shield her sister from false hope. He'd seen it in soldiers during the war, the ones who'd stop reading letters from home to dying comrades because the comfort of the lie hurt more than the truth. That night, after the girls were asleep again on the sofa, Nathaniel retrieved his medical bag from the corner. 5 years of dust had settled on the worn leather. He opened it carefully, the familiar smell of antiseptic and herbs bringing a flood of memories. His fingers traced the instruments inside: scalpel, forceps, stethoscope, suture kit, tools that had once felt like extensions of his own hands, tools he'd used to save countless lives during the war, tools that had failed him when he needed them most. "I don't know if I can do this again," he whispered to the empty room, to Rebecca's ghost, to the son who never had a chance to grow. Outside, an owl called into the night. Inside, the fire crackled, and 2 small girls slept peacefully, trusting him to keep them safe, trusting him to help them. Ice don't break itself. Nathaniel closed the bag and returned it to its corner. One day at a time. That's all anyone could do. 3 sharp knocks rattled the door, startling him from his thoughts. Sullivan again? At this hour? Nathaniel moved silently to the window, peering through the frost-rimmed glass. A slender figure stood on his porch, wrapped in a heavy coat, a lantern held high. Not Sullivan's broad-shouldered silhouette. He retrieved his rifle before opening the door a crack, blocking the entrance with his body. "Mr. Morgan." The voice was female, accented. "I am Catherine Chen, from town. I bring supplies for the children." Nathaniel hesitated, then opened the door wider. The woman on his porch was small in stature, her features distinctly Chinese, though she wore Western clothing. She carried a large basket covered with a cloth. Behind her, a horse and small sleigh waited in the moonlight. "Sheriff Sullivan told me you have my nieces," she said, her dark eyes searching his face. "May I see them?" "Your nieces?" Nathaniel didn't lower the rifle. "You're saying you're related to these girls?" "I am Clara Fletcher's sister." She met his gaze steadily. "The children's mother." Nathaniel studied her face, looking for any resemblance to the twins. There was something in the set of her jaw, perhaps, in the directness of her gaze. "Sheriff Sullivan said their mother was dead," he said cautiously. "That is what Maxwell Pierce claims." Her voice hardened slightly. "It is not what I believe." Behind him, a small voice spoke. "Aunt Catherine?" Nathaniel turned to see Elizabeth standing in her oversized borrowed clothes, her eyes wide with recognition. "Lizzie," Catherine Chen's voice broke. "Oh, child, you've grown so much." Elizabeth ran forward, slipping past Nathaniel to throw herself into the woman's arms. Catherine hugged her fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I knew someone would come," Elizabeth said, her voice muffled against Catherine's coat. "I saw it in my dream." Nathaniel lowered his rifle, watching as Abigail appeared in the doorway behind him. Unlike her sister, Abigail hung back, her expression guarded. "You never came before," she accused Catherine. "When Pa died, when Uncle Maxwell took us, you never came." Catherine set Elizabeth down gently, then approached Abigail, kneeling in the snow to meet her eye level. "I didn't know, Abigail. I was in San Francisco. I only received word 2 weeks ago." "From who?" Abigail demanded. Catherine reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded letter. "I believe from your mother." Abigail's eyes widened. Ma's alive? I believe so. Catherine held out the letter. The handwriting is Clara's. But the letter is dated just 3 months ago. Nathaniel stepped forward. Perhaps we should continue this conversation inside, Miss Chen. It's too cold for the children out here. Catherine nodded, retrieving her basket. As she passed Nathaniel, she said quietly, "Thank you for protecting them, Dr. Morgan. Sheriff Sullivan told me of your background. These children are fortunate you found them." Inside, Catherine opened her basket, revealing fresh bread, preserves, dried apples, and 2 small dresses that looked to be the right size for the twins. Elizabeth fell upon the gifts with delight, but Abigail remained reserved, studying the letter Catherine had brought. "This is Ma's writing," she finally admitted, "but it doesn't say where she is." "No," Catherine agreed, settling by the fire, "but it warns that Maxwell Pierce is dangerous, that he killed your father for the mine." "We know," Abigail said grimly. "I saw him do it." Catherine's face paled. "You witnessed it?" Abigail nodded. "Pa found gold in the mine. Real gold, not just silver like everyone thought. He told Ma, and they were going to move us away, start fresh. But Uncle Maxwell found out somehow. And he killed Josiah for it," Catherine finished, her voice hollow. "He pushed him," Abigail said flatly, "down the deep shaft, then told everyone it was an accident." Elizabeth had gone very still, clutching one of the new dresses to her chest. "Ma saw too," she said softly. "She tried to run with us, but Uncle Maxwell caught us at the house. He hit Ma with his walking stick. There was so much blood." Catherine made a small, pained sound. "I should have been there," she whispered. "After all Clara and Josiah did for me when I first came to this country." Nathaniel, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. "Ms. Chen, what exactly did Sheriff Sullivan tell you about the situation?" Catherine composed herself. "He said Maxwell Pierce had filed for guardianship of the girls after Josiah's death, that Clara was presumed dead of illness 2 years ago, that the girls had run away and you had found them." She paused. "He also said Pierce would come for them in 3 days with the law on his side." "And what do you intend to do?" Nathaniel asked. "Protect my nieces," she said without hesitation. "Find my sister if she lives, and see justice done for Josiah." "That's a tall order against a man like Maxwell Pierce," Nathaniel observed. "From what I hear, he owns half the county." "Not half," Catherine corrected. "A third, and only because he threatens and bribes his way to power." Her dark eyes flashed. "But he has never faced someone with nothing to lose." Nathaniel recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in soldiers who'd watched their comrades fall, in parents defending their children. It was the look of someone who had already calculated the cost and deemed it acceptable. "We'll need proof," he said, "of the murder, of the gold mine, of your sister being alive. Without that, Pierce's guardianship stands." "The proof exists," Elizabeth said suddenly. "Ma hid it. In the old oak tree where she used to tell us stories. She told me in my dream." Abigail rolled her eyes. "Lizzie, stop with the dreams." "No," Catherine said sharply. "Elizabeth may be right. Clara always did hide important things in that old tree. It was our special place as girls." "You know the tree?" Nathaniel asked. Catherine nodded. "By the stream, about a mile from Josiah's house. It has a hollow on the north side, just big enough for a small box." She turned to Elizabeth. "Is that where she hid it, child? In the oak's hollow?" Elizabeth nodded eagerly. "Under the flat rock, there's a tin box with the book of numbers and Ma's letters." Abigail looked doubtful, but she didn't contradict her sister. "We'll go at first light," Nathaniel decided. "If Pierce's guardianship is based on Clara being dead, proof she's alive would invalidate it, and proof of murder would put him in prison," Catherine added grimly. That night, Catherine slept in Nathaniel's bed while he took the floor near the fire, close to where the girls slept on the sofa. Outside, the temperature dropped further, the cold seeping through the log walls despite the fire's best efforts. In the darkest hours, Elizabeth began to whimper in her sleep. "No," she murmured, thrashing under her blanket. "Don't hurt her. Please don't." Nathaniel moved to her side, touching her forehead. It burned under his palm. Fever had taken hold. Her small body shook with chills despite the sweat beading on her brow. "Elizabeth," he called softly, "wake up, you're dreaming." Her eyes flew open, unfocused and glazed. The bad man's coming, she gasped. He knows we're here. He's coming with fire. Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter night. It's just a fever dream, he said, more to himself than to her. You're sick, that's all. But as he spoke, he remembered her knowing his past, her insistence that her mother was alive, her strange, accurate intuitions. Catherine appeared beside him, her hair loose around her shoulders. She's burning up, she said, laying a hand on Elizabeth's cheek. Do you have willow bark? Herbs? Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded toward his medical bag. In there, I haven't used it in years, but… I'll make tea, Catherine said, already moving to retrieve the bag. You cool her down. Abigail had awakened and was watching with fearful eyes. Is Lizzie going to die? She whispered. No, Nathaniel said firmly. Not on my watch. He sent Abigail for cool water and cloths, then began the familiar process of battling fever. His hands moved with muscle memory, even as his mind fought against the flood of painful memories. Another child, another fever, one he couldn't save. Not this time, he thought fiercely. Not again. Catherine returned with a bitter-smelling tea. Between them, they managed to get Elizabeth to swallow some, though she continued to mutter about the bad man and the fire. By dawn, her fever had broken. Elizabeth slept peacefully, her breathing even. Abigail had finally succumbed to exhaustion and curled up at her sister's feet. Nathaniel stepped outside into the bitter morning air, Catherine following silently. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, stars fading against the approaching day. Thank you, Catherine said quietly, for using your skills again. Elizabeth might not have survived the night otherwise. Nathaniel nodded, unable to articulate the complex emotions swirling within him. Relief that Elizabeth was better, pride that his hands had remembered their purpose, grief for the times they had failed. We should go to the oak tree as soon as the girls are able, he said instead. If Pierce really is coming, as Elizabeth said, we need that proof. You believe her dreams now? Catherine asked, a hint of a smile touching her lips. I'm not taking chances, Nathaniel replied. Not with their lives. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the first golden rays of sunlight touched the snow-covered landscape. Then, from the direction of the barn, a flicker of orange caught Nathaniel's eye. Not sunlight. Fire. The barn, he shouted, already running. Fire! Behind him, Catherine gasped and raced back to the house, presumably to wake the girls. Nathaniel sprinted across the yard, snow crunching under his boots, heart hammering in his chest. The barn door stood open, flames already licking up the interior walls. The horses were screaming inside, their terror piercing the morning stillness. Nathaniel plunged into the smoke, eyes watering, lungs burning. He reached the first stall and flung open the gate. The bay gelding bolted past him into the open air. 3 more stalls, 3 more panicked animals released. As he turned to exit, a roof beam cracked overhead. Nathaniel dove forward, rolling as the burning timber crashed where he'd stood a moment before. The heat was intense now, the smoke thickening. He crawled the last few yards to the door and stumbled out into the clean, cold air. The horses had scattered across the pasture, their dark shapes stark against the snow. Catherine was running toward him, rifle in hand, the girls close behind her. Someone's out there, she shouted, pointing toward the tree line. I saw movement. Nathaniel squinted through the smoke. A figure on horseback was disappearing into the pines, moving fast. Pierce's man, he growled. Has to be. The barn was beyond saving now, flames shooting high into the morning sky. They could only watch as 5 years of Nathaniel's hard work burned to ash. Elizabeth was right, Abigail said quietly. The bad man came with fire. Nathaniel looked down at the child, then at her sister, who stood watching the flames with a strange, distant expression. We need to go, he decided, now, before they come back. The oak tree, Elizabeth said, her voice dreamy. Ma's waiting there. Not really, but her words are. Catherine was already moving toward her sleigh. I'll hitch my horse. We can all fit. No, Nathaniel countered. They'll look for us together. We need to split up. He knelt before the girls. Abigail, Elizabeth, you'll go with your aunt. I'll follow separately and meet you at the oak tree. But, Abigail began to protest, it's safer this way, Nathaniel insisted. Trust me, I was a soldier before I was a doctor. I know about evasion. Reluctantly, Abigail nodded. Elizabeth simply stared at him with those knowing eyes. "Be careful, Dr. Morgan," she said softly. "The bad man wants to hurt you too now." Catherine helped the girls into her sleigh and covered them with blankets. "The old Fletcher place is abandoned," she told Nathaniel. "We can meet there if we get separated from the oak tree." Nathaniel nodded. "1 hour. If I'm not there by then, go to Sullivan." As the sleigh pulled away, Nathaniel returned to the burning barn for one last look. His life for the past 5 years had been about isolation, survival, numbness. He'd built these walls, literal and figurative, to keep the world at bay after losing Rebecca and their son. Now it was all burning down, and strangely, he felt more alive than he had in years. The Winchester rifle felt right in his hands as he saddled his remaining horse, a sturdy black mare that had escaped the fire. The medical bag he strapped behind the saddle, no longer willing to leave it behind. Ice don't break itself. As he rode away from the burning barn, Nathaniel Morgan felt the ice around his heart beginning to crack. Catherine Chen's sleigh cut through the fresh snow, the steel runners leaving twin tracks across the pristine white landscape. Beside her, Abigail and Elizabeth huddled beneath heavy blankets, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "How much farther to the oak tree?" Catherine asked, her breath fogging in the bitter air. "Just past the creek bend," Abigail replied, pointing ahead. "Pa used to take us there for picnics in summer." Elizabeth sat silently, her gaze distant. The fever had left her weak, but there was a curious intensity in her eyes as she scanned the horizon. "Someone's watching," she murmured. Catherine reined in the horse, instantly alert. "Where?" "Not here yet," Elizabeth said, her voice dreamy. "But coming, following our tracks." Abigail rolled her eyes. "Lizzie, stop it. You're scaring Aunt Catherine." But Catherine studied her younger niece thoughtfully. There had always been stories in their family about women who could see beyond the veil, who knew things they shouldn't know. Clara had mentioned in her letters that Elizabeth sometimes displayed such gifts. "We'll be quick," Catherine decided, snapping the reins. The horse lurched forward through the snow with renewed urgency. They found the oak tree exactly where Abigail had indicated, a massive ancient sentinel standing alone near the creek. Its bare winter branches reached toward the sky like gnarled fingers. Catherine helped the girls from the sleigh. "Show me where, Elizabeth. Where did your mother hide the box?" Elizabeth moved to the north side of the massive trunk with surprising confidence. "Here," she said, pointing to a hollow about 4 feet up. "But first we have to move the flat rock. For the key." Abigail frowned. "What key? Ma never said anything about a key." "She told me in my dream," Elizabeth insisted. "Last night when I was sick, she said, 'Remember the flat rock where we found the arrowhead?'" Catherine knelt in the snow. "I remember that day," she said softly. "Your mother and I found an arrowhead here when we were girls. We buried it beneath a flat rock as our secret treasure." She began brushing away snow, searching the ground around the oak's massive roots. Abigail joined her, skepticism giving way to urgency. "Here," Abigail exclaimed, uncovering a flat, slate-gray stone about the size of a dinner plate. "This has to be it." Together they lifted the stone. Beneath it lay a small, tarnished brass key and a folded scrap of paper. Catherine's hands trembled as she recognized her sister's handwriting. "For my daughters," she read aloud, "trust Elizabeth's dreams. They speak truth." Abigail's eyes widened. She looked at her sister with new respect. Catherine passed the key to Elizabeth. "You found it? You should open the box." Elizabeth climbed onto a root to reach the hollow, inserting the small key into a rusted lock that was almost invisible against the dark bark. With a grinding sound, it turned, and a small metal door swung open in the tree trunk. "A secret compartment," Catherine breathed. "Your father must have built it." Elizabeth reached inside and withdrew a tin box, its surface etched with delicate flower patterns. She handed it reverently to Catherine. "Ma's treasure box," Abigail whispered. She said it held her heart. Catherine's fingers traced the familiar pattern. Clara had carried this box since childhood. With a deep breath, she opened it. Inside lay several folded papers, a small leather-bound journal, and a locket containing a miniature family portrait. Josiah, Clara, and the twin girls, painted when the children were about 5 years old. The top letter bore Catherine's name. She unfolded it with trembling fingers. My dearest sister, she read, her voice catching. If you are reading this, I pray it means my daughters are safe with you. Maxwell Pierce is not who he pretends to be. He murdered Josiah for the gold mine and tried to kill me as well. Abigail's small hand clutched Catherine's arm. I told you, she whispered fiercely. I told you he killed Pa. Catherine continued reading. I survived his attack but suffered injuries that have affected my memory and speech. I have been recovering at St. Mary's Convent in Colorado, where the sisters have shown me great kindness. I entrusted the girls to our friend Sarah Williams, believing they would be safer with her than with me in my weakened state. But I have learned that Sarah fell ill and died, and Maxwell has taken custody of my precious daughters. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Poor Miss Sarah. She was so kind. I am coming back for my children, Catherine read on, but I need proof of Maxwell's crimes to keep them safe. Josiah discovered that the north seam of the Whispering Pines mine contains not silver, but gold, a fortune worth more than $68,000. Maxwell learned of this discovery and killed my beloved husband to claim it for himself. Catherine paused, looking at the other documents in the box. One was an official-looking mining claim with an assayer's report attached. Another appeared to be pages torn from Josiah's journal, detailing his discovery of the gold seam and his plans to sell the mine and move the family to California. This is it, Catherine breathed. Proof of the gold mine. Proof of Clara being alive. This will stop Pierce's guardianship claim. And put him in jail for killing Pa? Abigail asked, her young face hard with determination. Yes, Catherine promised, for killing your father. A twig snapped in the distance. All three froze, suddenly aware of how exposed they were beside the solitary oak. Someone's coming, Elizabeth whispered, her eyes wide. The bad man's friend, the one with the scar. Catherine hastily gathered the papers back into the tin box and closed it. Back to the sleigh, quickly. They had barely reached the vehicle when a horseman appeared at the edge of the clearing. Vernon Cobb sat astride a rangy gray horse, a rifle balanced across his saddle. The scar that bisected his left cheek pulled his mouth into a perpetual half-sneer. Well, well, he called, his voice carrying across the snow. Miss Chen and the little Fletcher girls. Out for a morning ride? Catherine pushed the girls behind her. What do you want, Mr. Cobb? Mr. Pierce is mighty concerned about his nieces, Cobb replied, urging his horse forward slowly. Running off in the night, getting mixed up with strangers. He sent me to bring them home. They're not going anywhere with you, Catherine said firmly. Cobb's eyes narrowed. This ain't really your business, Miss Chen. Those girls are legally Mr. Pierce's wards. Judge signed the papers himself. Based on false information, Catherine countered, their mother is alive. We have proof. Something flickered in Cobb's expression. Surprise, quickly masked. Is that so? Well, ain't that interesting? Mr. Pierce will want to see this proof. I'm sure he would, Catherine said coldly. Just as I'm sure Sheriff Sullivan will want to see it too. Cobb's hand tightened on his rifle. Think you'd better hand over whatever you found in that tree, Miss Chen. Make things easier for everyone. Catherine's chin lifted. I think not, Mr. Cobb. The standoff stretched for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Elizabeth stepped forward. Mr. Cobb, she said, her voice clear and steady despite her recent illness. You don't have to do this. You don't have to help him anymore. Cobb blinked, visibly disconcerted by the child's direct address. What are you talking about, girl? You didn't know about the gold, Elizabeth continued, as if explaining something obvious. You didn't know he killed Pa. You just thought you were helping him with business, but now you know, and it feels bad inside. Cobb's weathered face paled slightly. You shut your mouth, child. You don't know nothing about me. I know you have a daughter my age in St. Louis, Elizabeth said softly. I know you send her money every month. I know you wouldn't want someone to do to her what Uncle Maxwell did to us. Abigail stared at her sister in shock. Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter cold. How could Elizabeth possibly know such things? Cobb's rifle barrel drooped as he stared at the small girl. How in God's name? A gunshot cracked through the clearing. Cobb jerked in his saddle, blood blooming on his shoulder. His horse reared, nearly unseating him. Get down! Catherine shouted, pulling the girls to the ground beside the sleigh. From the tree line emerged Nathaniel Morgan on his black mare, rifle raised for a second shot if needed. "Get in the sleigh," he called to Catherine. "I'll hold him off." Cobb had regained control of his horse and was wheeling around, one hand pressed to his bleeding shoulder. "This ain't over," he snarled, before spurring his mount toward the trees. Nathaniel rode up as Catherine bundled the girls back into the sleigh. "Are you all right?" he asked, scanning them for injuries. "Thanks to your timing," Catherine replied. "Did you find what you were looking for, Elizabeth?" The girl nodded, clutching the tin box to her chest. "Ma's proof." Nathaniel glanced at the bay, then at the retreating figure of Cobb. "He'll go straight to Pierce. We need to get to town, to Sullivan." "The Fletcher place first," Catherine insisted. "We need to examine these documents fully before we present them. And the girls need rest." Nathaniel nodded. "I'll follow at a distance. Keep watch. If Cobb or anyone else approaches, I'll warn you." As Catherine's sleigh pulled away, Nathaniel cast one last look at the ancient oak tree standing sentinel over the snow-covered land. Whatever secrets it had held were now in the hands of two small girls and their determined aunt. The old Fletcher homestead sat nestled against a rocky hillside, its windows dark and empty. No smoke rose from the chimney, and snow had drifted against the door. But the structure itself was sound, a testament to Josiah Fletcher's craftsmanship. Catherine forced the door open, ushering the girls inside while Nathaniel stabled the horses in the small lean-to behind the house. The interior was cold but intact. Furniture remained in place, covered with dust cloths. Pictures still hung on the walls, though they were grayed with dust. "Home," Abigail whispered, touching a small wooden horse on the mantelpiece. "I never thought we'd come back." Elizabeth moved through the space like a dreamer, trailing her fingers over familiar objects. "Ma's chair," she said, stopping by a rocking chair near the cold hearth. "She used to rock us here and tell stories." Nathaniel and Catherine exchanged glances. The poignancy of the children's homecoming was not lost on either of them. "Let's get a fire going," Nathaniel said gently. "Then we can look at what you found." While he built a fire, Catherine explored the kitchen, finding some preserved food still sealed in jars. The girls went to their old bedroom, returning with blankets and a rag doll that Elizabeth clutched to her chest. Once warmth began to return to the house, they gathered around the table. Elizabeth carefully opened the tin box and spread out its contents. "This is the mining report," Abigail said, pointing to an official document with wax seals. "Pa was so excited when he got it. He said we'd be rich, that we could go to California and live by the ocean." Catherine examined the paper. The assayer confirms a gold vein estimated at $68,000. Dated 2 weeks before Josiah's death. Nathaniel whistled softly. "That's motive enough for murder." "And this," Catherine continued, lifting a journal, "is Josiah's record of his conversations with Pierce about selling the mine. According to this, Pierce offered him $5,000, claiming the silver was running out. Pa refused," Abigail said. "He said the mine was worth 10 times that." "Which it was," Nathaniel noted, "given the gold discovery." Elizabeth had been studying her mother's letter. "Ma says she's getting better, that her words come easier now." She looked up, eyes bright with hope. "She's really coming back for us." "Yes, sweetheart," Catherine assured her. "Your mother survived, and she's been healing at a convent in Colorado." "But why didn't she take us with her?" Abigail asked, the hurt evident in her voice. "Why did she leave us with Miss Sarah instead?" Catherine chose her words carefully. "Your mother was badly injured, Abigail. According to her letter, she couldn't speak properly or remember things clearly. She was afraid she couldn't care for you properly until she healed. And then Miss Sarah died," Nathaniel added gently, "and Pierce took custody before your mother could return." Abigail's expression softened slightly, though the hurt remained in her eyes. "There's one more document here," Catherine said, lifting a folded paper with an official seal. "It appears to be Josiah's will." "The real one?" Abigail asked sharply. Catherine nodded slowly as she read. "Yes, it leaves everything to Clara and you girls. There's a note in Clara's handwriting saying Pierce created a false will after Josiah's death, naming himself as beneficiary and guardian. So he stole the mine and stole us," Abigail said bitterly. "But now we have proof," Nathaniel reminded her. "Proof we can take to Sheriff Sullivan." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Outside, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. They would need to stay the night. We'll go to town first thing tomorrow, Nathaniel decided. For now, let's make this place secure. While Catherine prepared a simple meal from the preserved foods, Nathaniel checked doors and windows. The girls moved through their childhood home, rediscovering forgotten treasures and memories. Elizabeth paused before a small painting on the wall, a landscape showing a cabin by a lake, mountains rising in the background. California, she said softly. Where we were going to go. Nathaniel stopped beside her. It's beautiful. Ma painted it. She'd never been there, but Pa described it to her from when he was a young man. Elizabeth's small hand found his. We can still go there someday. After we find Ma. Nathaniel felt something twist in his chest. The hope in her voice was both heartbreaking and infectious. Maybe you will, he said. You could come too, she suggested, looking up at him with those uncanny eyes. You and Aunt Catherine, we could all go together. Before Nathaniel could respond, Abigail called from the bedroom. Lizzie, come look! I found Ma's jewelry box! Elizabeth squeezed his hand once, then darted away, leaving Nathaniel alone with the painted dream of California and a future he hadn't allowed himself to imagine in 5 years. That night, as the girls slept in their old bedroom and Catherine kept watch, Nathaniel stepped outside to check the horses. The night was clear and bitterly cold, stars blazing overhead in the vast Wyoming sky. His breath formed clouds that dissipated into the darkness. He was securing the lean-to door when he felt it, the prickling sensation of being watched. Slowly he turned, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved against the starlit snow, but the feeling persisted. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Who's there? He called, and show yourself. Silence answered him. Then barely perceptible, the soft crunch of footsteps in snow moving away, not toward him. Nathaniel drew his gun and followed the sound, moving cautiously around the side of the house. In the distance, a shadow detached itself from the trees and disappeared into the darkness. Too small to be Cobb or another of Pierce's men. A woman, perhaps? He considered pursuing but thought better of it. Whoever it was had chosen to retreat rather than approach, and he couldn't leave the house and its precious occupants unguarded. When he returned inside, he found Catherine waiting, her own pistol in hand. What is it? She asked. Someone was watching the house, he replied quietly. They left when I spotted them. Catherine's expression tightened. Pierce's men? I don't think so. Too small. Moved differently. Moved. Nathaniel hesitated. It could have been Clara, Catherine finished for him. You think it might have been my sister. Elizabeth keeps saying her mother is coming, that she's seen it in her dreams. He shrugged. Maybe the child knows something we don't. Catherine looked toward the bedroom where the girls slept. Clara would approach cautiously, she reasoned. She wouldn't know who was in the house with her daughters, whether to trust them. We'll leave a lantern burning in the window, Nathaniel decided. If it is Clara, she'll recognize it as a signal that friends are here. And if it's not, Catherine asked. Nathaniel checked his revolver. Then we'll be ready for whoever it is. The night passed without further incident. At dawn, they prepared to leave for town, packing the precious documents securely in Catherine's satchel. The girls seemed transformed by a night in their own beds. Even Abigail's habitual wariness had softened. As they were loading the sleigh, Elizabeth suddenly stopped, her head cocked as if listening. Horses, she said, coming fast. Nathaniel strained to hear, and there it was, the distant but unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching at speed. Get in the house, he ordered. Catherine, take the girls to the back room. Be ready to run for the hills if needed. What about you? Catherine demanded, already herding the girls inside. I'll see who it is. His voice left no room for argument. Catherine hesitated, then nodded sharply. Be careful, Doctor. Inside the house, Nathaniel positioned himself by a window, rifle ready. The approaching riders came into view. 5 men on horseback, led by a figure he recognized immediately from Sullivan's descriptions. Maxwell Pierce himself, distinguished even at a distance by his silver-headed cane strapped to his saddle. Beside him rode Vernon Cobb, his shoulder bandaged from yesterday's wound, and 3 other men Nathaniel didn't recognize. All were armed. They reined in before the house, Pierce raising a hand to halt his companions. Morgan, he called, I know you're in there with my nieces. Send them out, and we can resolve this peacefully." Nathaniel remained silent, watching through the window. Pierce was a tall man, elegantly dressed despite the early hour and bitter cold. His silver beard was neatly trimmed, his bearing aristocratic. Only the hardness in his eyes betrayed his true nature. "I have legal guardianship, Morgan," Pierce continued when no response came. "You're breaking the law by harboring those children." Nathaniel finally called back. "Your guardianship was obtained by fraud, Pierce. Clara Fletcher is alive." A flicker of something, surprise, alarm, crossed Pierce's face before his expression hardened again. "Preposterous. Clara died 2 years ago. I attended her funeral myself." "Then you buried an empty coffin," Nathaniel retorted. "We have proof she's alive, written in her own hand. Proof that's already on its way to Sheriff Sullivan." This was a bluff. The documents were still in Catherine's satchel. But Pierce couldn't know that. Pierce leaned forward in his saddle, speaking quietly to Cobb and the others. Nathaniel used the moment to glance back at Catherine, who had positioned herself in the hallway with a clear view of both the front door and the rear exit, her pistol ready. "The sheriff's already been notified," Nathaniel called, pressing his advantage. "He's on his way with a posse. You'd be wise to leave before they arrive." Pierce's laugh held no humor. "A desperate lie, Doctor. Sullivan left for the county seat yesterday on judicial business. He won't return until tomorrow." His voice hardened. "I'm losing patience. Send out my nieces, or we'll come in and take them." Nathaniel's mind raced. If Sullivan was truly away, their position was precarious. 5 armed men against himself and Catherine, with 2 children to protect. "The girls stay with their aunt," he answered firmly. "Catherine Chen is Clara's sister and their rightful guardian until their mother returns." Pierce's face darkened with fury. "That Chinese shopkeeper has no claim to my brother's children. This is a Christian country, and those girls will be raised properly. Not by some foreign." A gunshot cracked through the morning air, cutting off Pierce's tirade. But it hadn't come from Nathaniel's rifle, nor from Pierce's men. It had come from somewhere behind the house. Everyone froze. Then a woman's voice called out, clear and commanding, despite a slight slur to the words. "The next shot won't miss, Maxwell. Back away from my home and my children." Nathaniel risked a glance through the side window. On the rocky slope behind the house stood a slender figure in a dark coat, rifle raised and steady. Her hair, the same red gold as the twins, whipped in the winter wind. Clara Fletcher had returned. Pierce's face drained of color. "Impossible," he breathed, though Nathaniel could read the words on his lips rather than hear them. "Nothing's impossible for a mother protecting her children," Clara called. "You should have made sure I was dead before you buried me, Maxwell." Pierce recovered his composure quickly. "Clara, my dear, you're clearly unwell. These delusions about me harming Josiah. Save your lies." Clara's voice was steady despite the slight slurring. "I saw you push him. I heard you laugh as he fell. And I have proof of why you did it." Inside the house, Catherine had moved to the back door. "Clara?" she called, her voice breaking. "Is it really you?" "Catherine?" The woman on the hill faltered slightly. "You came. You got my letter." "Yes," Catherine choked out. "I'm here with the girls. They're safe." Clara's relief was visible even at a distance. "Thank God." Pierce, sensing the momentum shifting away from him, made a desperate move. "Enough of this farce. Get the girls," he ordered his men. "Bring them out." Cobb and 2 others dismounted, drawing their weapons. The 3rd man remained on horseback beside Pierce. "Last warning," Nathaniel called. "The house is defended. Leave now." Cobb hesitated, looking from Pierce to the armed figures at the house, then to Clara on the hillside. Something shifted in his scarred face. A decision made. "Mr. Pierce," he said slowly, "maybe we should—" "Do as I say," Pierce thundered, "or you'll never see another dollar from me." Cobb's expression hardened. "Some things are worth more than dollars, sir." He stepped back, lowering his weapon. "I don't kill women and children, and I don't help murderers escape justice." Pierce's face contorted with rage. "You gutless!" Whatever insult he intended was lost as he suddenly spurred his horse forward, charging toward the house. The man, still mounted, followed suit, both drawing pistols as they rode. Nathaniel's rifle cracked. Pierce's companion jerked in the saddle, then tumbled into the snow. Pierce himself kept coming. From the hillside, Clara fired again, the bullet kicking up snow just before Pierce's horse. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider, but Pierce regained control and continued his charge. Inside, Catherine shouted, "The girls! Get the girls out the back!" Nathaniel had no time to look behind him. Pierce was nearly at the house, pistol raised. Nathaniel fired again, but the rifle jammed, a catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. He dropped the useless weapon and drew his revolver, throwing open the front door. Pierce was less than 20 yards away now, his face a mask of fury and desperation. "You took everything from me," Pierce screamed, firing wildly. A bullet splintered the doorframe inches from Nathaniel's head. Time seemed to slow. Nathaniel raised his revolver, aimed and fired in one fluid motion. The bullet struck Pierce in the chest. The banker swayed in the saddle, a look of almost comical surprise crossing his features. Then he toppled sideways, landing heavily in the blood-stained snow. In the sudden silence that followed, Nathaniel became aware of several things at once. Clara running down the hillside toward the house. Catherine emerging from the back door with the girls. Cobb and the other men backing away, hands raised in surrender. And the unmistakable sound of approaching horses, many of them. Over the ridge came Sheriff Emmett Sullivan, leading not a posse but a detachment of cavalry from the nearby fort. They thundered into the clearing, quickly surrounding Bob and the others. "Seems I got here just in time," Sullivan called, dismounting. "Or perhaps a bit late." He glanced at Pierce's motionless form. "He gave us no choice," Nathaniel said. He charged the house, firing. The girls were inside. Sullivan nodded grimly. "Vernon Cobb rode to the fort last night, confessed everything about the murder of Josiah Fletcher, the attempt on Clara's life, the false guardianship. Said his conscience couldn't bear it anymore." He looked toward the twins, now clutching their mother, while Catherine stood beside them, tears streaming down her face. "Some things make even the hardest men find their humanity again, I suppose." Nathaniel followed his gaze. Clara knelt in the snow, holding her daughters close, murmuring words of love and reassurance. As Clara embraced her daughters, Nathaniel stepped back, giving the family space for their reunion. But Abigail suddenly pulled away from her mother and turned to him. "He kept his promise, Ma," she said, her voice stronger than Nathaniel had yet heard it. "When everyone else said you were dead and Uncle Maxwell was hunting us, Dr. Morgan protected us, even when his barn got burned." She reached for Nathaniel's hand and pulled him closer to the family circle, a gesture of inclusion that spoke louder than words. From her pocket, she retrieved the small wooden horse he'd returned to her earlier. "And he kept my luck safe," she added, closing her fingers tightly around the carving. "Just like he said he would." The pride in her voice, the trust now evident in her eyes, completed a transformation that had begun with suspicion and fear. Nathaniel met Clara's questioning gaze over the child's head and saw understanding dawn. The realization that her daughter's trust, so wounded by Pierce's betrayal, had somehow been restored through his care. "Then I owe him more than I can ever repay," Clara said softly. Despite the slight drooping on one side of her face, evidence of her injury, she was beautiful in her joy. "How did you get back so quickly?" Nathaniel asked. "Pierce said you were at the county seat." Sullivan smiled thinly. "I was. Came back at a gallop when the fort commander forwarded Cobb's confession. Brought the cavalry because I wasn't sure what we'd be riding into." He shook his head. "Never thought Maxwell Pierce would snap like this. Man always seemed so controlled, so civilized." "Desperation changes people," Nathaniel observed. "He was deeply in debt, according to the documents we found. The gold mine was his only way out." "Gold?" Sullivan's eyebrows rose. "Fletcher's silver mine had gold? A fortune of it, $68,000 worth, according to the assayer's report." Sullivan whistled softly. No wonder Pierce was willing to kill for it. He glanced at the banker's body now being examined by one of the soldiers. Though in the end, it cost him everything. Clara had risen and was approaching them, her daughters at her sides. Elizabeth broke away and ran to Nathaniel, throwing her arms around his waist. "I told you Ma was coming," she said, looking up at him with those knowing eyes. "I saw it in my dream." Nathaniel rested his hand gently on her head. "Yes, you did. I should have believed you sooner." Clara stopped before them, her gaze steady despite the slight asymmetry of her features. "De Morgan," she said, her words careful but clear. "Thank you for protecting my daughters." "They're remarkable children, Mrs. Fletcher," he replied. "You should be very proud." "I am." Her good eye glistened with tears, and grateful beyond words. Catherine joined them, and the conversation turned to practical matters: statements to be given, bodies to be dealt with, arrangements to be made. Through it all, Nathaniel found his gaze returning to the Fletcher women, mother, aunt, and daughters, reunited against all odds. He thought of his own family, lost to him forever, of the empty cabin he would return to, its barn now ashes, of the life he had built around absence and grief. As if reading his thoughts, Elizabeth slipped her small hand into his. "You don't have to be alone anymore, Doctor," she said softly. "Ice don't break itself, remember?" Nathaniel looked down at her upturned face, so serious, so wise beyond her years, and felt something shift inside him, a crack in the ice that had encased his heart for 5 long years. "I remember," he said. Behind them, Clara was speaking with Sullivan, her speech improving with each sentence as she reclaimed her voice and her story. Abigail stood protectively at her mother's side, occasionally glancing back at Nathaniel and Elizabeth with a new softness in her expression. Catherine approached, her dark eyes kind. "You have nowhere to go now, with your ranch burned," she said. "The girls would be devastated if you disappeared from their lives." "I hadn't thought that far ahead," Nathaniel admitted. "I've been living one day at a time for so long." "Perhaps it's time to think of tomorrow," she suggested. "And the day after that." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "And all the days that come with spring," she added, "when the snow melts." Nathaniel looked from the child to her aunt, then to Clara and Abigail still speaking with Sullivan. 4 lives that had become unexpectedly entwined with his own. 4 reasons to believe in tomorrow. "Perhaps it is," he agreed. As they prepared to leave for town, Pierce's body loaded onto a wagon, Cobb and the others under cavalry escort, Nathaniel found himself pausing for one last look at the Fletcher homestead. It stood solid against the winter landscape, damaged but enduring, like the people who had sheltered within it, like himself. The mid-morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long blue shadows across the pristine snow. In a few months, the same land would be transformed. The snow melted away, new grass pushing through the soil, wildflowers dotting the meadows. Renewal, rebirth, the natural order of things. Elizabeth appeared beside him, her red-gold hair catching the sunlight. "We'll come back," she said with her usual certainty. "In spring, all of us together." Nathaniel nodded, allowing himself to believe her. After all, she had been right about everything else. "In spring," he echoed. Together they turned toward the waiting sleigh, toward town, toward whatever future awaited them all when the snow finally melted. The town of Whispering Pines greeted them with suspicious eyes and hushed whispers. News traveled fast, even in winter, and the sight of Maxwell Pierce's body draped across a cavalry horse had drawn onlookers despite the bitter cold. Sheriff Sullivan led the procession down Main Street, Nathaniel and the Fletcher women following in Catherine's sleigh. Behind them came the soldiers escorting Vernon Cobb and Pierce's other men. "They're staring at Ma," Abigail whispered, pressing closer to Clara. "Let them stare," Clara replied, her voice soft but steady despite the slight slur. "I've nothing to hide." But Nathaniel noted how she unconsciously turned her face to conceal the drooping side, the visible reminder of Pierce's attempt on her life. 2 years of hiding, of painful recovery, had left their mark on more than just her body. They stopped before the sheriff's office, a small wooden building with a jail attached at the rear. Sullivan dismounted and approached the sleigh. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'll need your formal statement," he said. "Dr. Morgan's as well. The circuit judge arrives tomorrow, and we'll need everything in order." Clara nodded. "Of course." "What about the children?" Catherine asked. Sullivan's weathered face softened as he looked at the twins. "Miss Chen, perhaps you could take them to your store. They've seen enough violence for one day." "No," Abigail said firmly. "We want to stay with Ma." Clara touched her daughter's cheek. "Abigail, please go with your aunt. I'll join you soon." "But I need you to look after Elizabeth, Clara said, employing that universal maternal strategy of giving responsibility to redirect stubborn determination. Abigail hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine, but you'll come straight to Aunt Catherine's when you're done? I promise. As Catherine led the girls away, Nathaniel offered Clara his arm to help her navigate the icy boardwalk. Her steps were cautious but determined. Inside the sheriff's office, Sullivan gestured them to chairs before his desk. The room was plain but warm, a pot-bellied stove radiating heat in the corner. Now, Sullivan began, pulling out paper and ink, I need the full story from the beginning. Clara straightened, her hands folded in her lap. It started 2 years ago, she said carefully, each word deliberate as she fought against her injury. Josiah discovered gold in the north shaft of the Whispering Pines mine. Pure gold, not just silver as everyone believed. He kept it secret? Sullivan asked. From most, yes, but he told Maxwell, hoping his cousin would loan him enough money to hire more men for extraction. Clara's expression hardened. Instead, Maxwell offered to buy the mine for far less than it's worth. $5,000, Nathaniel added, recalling the document they'd found, when it was worth nearly $70,000. Sullivan whistled softly. And Josiah refused? Of course, Clara said. He intended to develop the mine himself, then sell it properly once the gold vein was officially documented. Her voice wavered slightly. That's when the accidents began. Accidents? Sullivan prompted. Equipment failures, cave-ins in sections that had been stable for years. Clara's good eye glistened with unshed tears. Josiah suspected sabotage, but he couldn't prove it. Until the day he died, Nathaniel guessed. Clara nodded. He caught Maxwell tampering with the support beams in the deep shaft. There was an argument. I could hear their voices from where I was waiting outside. Then, her voice broke. Then silence. When I entered the mine, I found Maxwell standing alone at the shaft edge, his walking stick in hand. And Josiah? Sullivan asked gently. At the bottom of the shaft. Maxwell claimed he'd fallen accidentally during their argument. Clara's jaw tightened. But I saw the dirt on Maxwell's hands, the scuff marks where Josiah had tried to resist being pushed. You confronted him? Nathaniel asked. I did, foolishly. Her hand rose unconsciously to the drooping side of her face. He struck me with his walking stick. I remember falling, bleeding, and then nothing until I woke days later at St. Mary's Convent in Colorado. Sullivan frowned. How did you get all the way to Colorado? A traveling sister of mercy found me on the road outside town, half dead. She was returning to her convent and took me with her. Clara's voice grew stronger as she continued. I couldn't speak, couldn't remember my own name for months. The head injury, it took everything from me. But you recovered, Nathaniel observed. Your speech has improved even since this morning. Clara gave him a small smile. The sisters had a physician who specializes in head injuries. He said using my voice would strengthen it again, that memories might return in time. Her expression darkened. And they did, in dreams at first, then in flashes during the day. My daughter's faces, Josiah's death, Maxwell's betrayal. And when you remembered, you came back, Sullivan concluded. I wrote to Catherine first, then to my friend Sarah Williams, who had agreed to care for the girls while I recovered. Clara's composure cracked slightly. But Sarah had died of pneumonia months before my letter arrived, and Maxwell had already taken my daughters. Sullivan finished writing, then looked up. We'll need the documentation you found, the assayer's report, Josiah's journal, the original will. Catherine has them, Nathaniel said, at her store. Good. Sullivan set down his pen. I won't lie to you, Clara. This won't be simple. Pierce had powerful friends, even outside Whispering Pines. The fact that he died while attacking your home helps our case, but there will be those who question your version of events. Let them question, Clara said firmly. I have the truth on my side and witnesses. Yes, you do. Sullivan's gaze shifted to Nathaniel, including a highly respected former Army surgeon. That counts for something, especially with the circuit judge. Will Vernon Cobb testify? Nathaniel asked. He's already provided a written confession about following Pierce's orders to burn your barn, De Morgan. Says he drew the line at harming the children. Sullivan shrugged. Man's trying to save his own skin. but his testimony corroborates Mrs. Fletcher's account. And Judge Holloway? Clara asked. He signed the guardianship papers that gave my children to my husband's murderer. Sullivan's expression hardened. The judge will have his own questions to answer. Cobb claims Pierce was bribing Holloway for years. A knock at the door interrupted them. One of the soldiers entered, saluting Sullivan. Sir, telegram from the territorial governor, he said, handing over a yellow paper. Sullivan read it quickly, his eyebrows rising. Well, he said finally, it seems Judge Holloway has resigned his position, effective immediately. The governor is sending Judge Emmett Wilson to replace him and hear this case. Is that good or bad? Clara asked. Good, Sullivan assured her. Wilson's tough but fair. Known him for 20 years. He won't be swayed by Pierce's money or connections. The relief on Clara's face was palpable. For the first time since their arrival in town, Nathaniel saw her shoulders relax slightly. There's one more thing, Sullivan added, his tone gentler. About your daughters, particularly Elizabeth. Clara tensed again. What about her? Cobb mentioned something unusual, said she knew things she couldn't possibly know, about his daughter in St. Louis, about private conversations between him and Pierce. Sullivan looked uncomfortable, said it was like she could see inside his head. A long silence followed. Then Clara spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth has always had intuitions. Even as a baby, she seemed to know things before they happened. It runs in our family, she continued. My grandmother had it. They called it the knowing back in Scotland. Mostly it comes as dreams, sometimes as feelings. She met Sullivan's gaze directly. Does this complicate matters? Sullivan considered this. Some folks might find it unsettling. But Judge Wilson isn't superstitious, and a child's unusual perceptions aren't relevant to Pierce's crimes. He smiled slightly. Besides, Cobb's testimony suggests her knowing helped convince him to turn against Pierce. Can't fault her for that. Clara's relief was evident. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet, Sullivan cautioned. We still have a difficult road ahead. But for now, he stood, indicating their interview was concluded. Get some rest. You're safe here. Outside, the winter afternoon was already fading toward dusk. The streets of Whispering Pines had emptied as the temperature dropped and people retreated to warm hearths. May I walk you to Catherine's store? Nathaniel offered. Clara accepted with a nod. They moved slowly along the boardwalk, her arm linked through his for stability on the icy planks. You've been very kind, she said after they had gone a block in companionable silence. To my daughters. To Catherine. You didn't have to involve yourself in our troubles. I couldn't have done otherwise, Nathaniel replied honestly. Clara studied his face. My sister told me about your loss, your wife and son. She hesitated. I'm deeply sorry. Nathaniel felt the familiar constriction in his chest that accompanied any mention of Rebecca and the baby, but strangely, it was less painful than usual. Thank you, he managed. Elizabeth says you were a gifted healer during the war, Claire continued. Hands like golden light, she called them. She said you saved many lives. Not the ones that mattered most, Nathaniel said before he could stop himself. Clara's fingers tightened on his arm. I understand, she said softly. After Josiah died, I thought I'd never feel whole again. Even now, with my daughters back, there's a space in my heart that will always belong to him. Does it get easier? Nathaniel asked, surprising himself with the question. Not easier, Clara considered. Different. The grief changes shape, becomes something you carry rather than something that carries you. She looked up at him with her good eye, the other slightly unfocused. You learn to live alongside it, not consumed by it. They had reached Catherine's store, a modest but well-kept establishment with Chen Mercantile, painted in neat letters across the front window. Through the glass, they could see Catherine serving a customer while the twins sat at a small table in the corner, Abigail writing in a notebook and Elizabeth drawing. They look so peaceful, Clara murmured, after everything they've endured. Children are remarkably resilient, Nathaniel observed, more so than adults sometimes. Yes, though I worry about the scars we can't see. Clara's gaze lingered on her daughters. Abigail blames herself for not protecting her father. Elizabeth carries the burden of her knowing and the disbelief it often brings. And both lived under Maxwell's cruelty for months. Yet they survived, Nathaniel pointed out. They kept their humanity, their capacity for trust and love. That speaks to their strength and yours. Clara's smile was tinged with sadness. You're kind to say so. I only hope I can be the mother they deserve, even with my... She gestured vaguely toward the drooping side of her face. Your injury doesn't define you, Nathaniel said firmly. Not to them, and not to anyone who truly sees you. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had traversed the dark valleys of loss and emerged, changed but unbroken. The moment was interrupted as Elizabeth looked up, spotted them through the window, and waved enthusiastically. Clara waved back, her smile warming. I should go to them, she said. Nathaniel nodded. Of course. I'll return in the morning, before the judge arrives. As Clara turned to enter the store, she paused. Dr. Morgan, Nathaniel, where will you stay tonight? He hadn't considered this. His ranch was burned, his possessions reduced to what he carried. The hotel, I suppose, he said. No, Clara decided. Catherine has rooms above the store. There's space enough for all of us. She hesitated. Unless you'd prefer your privacy. 5 years of solitude had been enough, Nathaniel realized. I would be grateful for the company, he admitted. Clara's smile deepened. Then it settled. Inside Catherine's store smelled of spices, leather, and the particular dusty sweetness of dry goods. The customer was just leaving as they entered, eyeing Clara curiously but saying nothing. Ma! Elizabeth leaped from her chair and ran to Clara, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. Abigail followed more sedately, but her eyes shone with the same joy. Is it over? She asked. Did the sheriff believe you? He did, Clara assured her, embracing both daughters. And the circuit judge arrives tomorrow to make things official. Catherine approached, wiping her hands on her apron. I've prepared rooms upstairs, she said. Clara, you and the girls will take the larger bedroom. Dr. Morgan, if you don't mind the small room at the back... It's more than generous, Nathaniel said. Thank you. Elizabeth tugged at his hand. Come see what I drew, she insisted, pulling him toward the table. The drawing showed 5 figures standing before what appeared to be Catherine's store. Clara, Catherine, Abigail, Elizabeth herself, and a taller figure Nathaniel recognized as himself. Above them, a bright sun shone down on flowers pushing through melting snow. It's spring, Elizabeth explained, when we'll all be happy again. It's beautiful, Nathaniel said sincerely. It hasn't happened yet, Elizabeth confided in a whisper. But it will. I saw it in my dream. Nathaniel studied the child's earnest face. After everything he'd witnessed, he found he no longer doubted her unusual perceptions. I believe you, he said simply. Elizabeth beamed. That evening they shared a simple but nourishing meal in Catherine's living quarters above the store. The rooms were small but comfortable, decorated with a blend of American practicality and Chinese artistry, paintings of mountains and rivers hanging alongside dried herbs and cooking utensils. Clara grew noticeably tired as the meal progressed, the day's exertions taking their toll on her still recovering body. Catherine helped her to bed, the twins following close behind. Left alone, Nathaniel moved to the small window overlooking Main Street. Whispering pines lay quiet beneath a blanket of fresh snow that had begun falling during dinner. Lamplight spilled from windows, smoke rose from chimneys, and the occasional figure hurried through the streets, bent against the cold. A normal winter evening in a small Wyoming town. Yet everything had changed. For the Fletcher women, for the town itself with Pierce's death, and for Nathaniel most of all. He had spent 5 years in isolation, believing he had nothing left to offer the world after failing to save his family. Now he found himself enmeshed in the lives of these 4 remarkable women, using his medical skills again, feeling emotions he had thought long dead. You're brooding. He turned to find Catherine standing in the doorway, a teapot and 2 cups on a tray in her hands. Contemplating, he corrected with a small smile. A fine distinction. She set the tray on a small table. Ginseng tea, good for clarity of thought. Nathaniel accepted the offered cup, inhaling the unfamiliar but pleasant aroma. Your sister and the girls settled in? Asleep already. Clara's strength is returning but slowly. Catherine sipped her tea. The physician at St. Mary's told her it might take years to fully recover from such a head injury. Some effects might be permanent. The facial drooping may improve with time, Nathaniel offered, and her speech has already shown remarkable progress just in the short time I've known her. Catherine nodded. Clara was always determined. Once she sets her mind to something, nothing stops her. She studied him over the rim of her cup. A quality I suspect you share, Doctor. Perhaps once, Nathaniel admitted, not so much in recent years. Until two small girls appeared in your barn, Catherine observed. Until then, he agreed. They drank in companionable silence for a moment. Then Catherine asked, "What will you do after the trial? Return to your ranch?" The question caught him off guard. He hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis, beyond ensuring the Fletcher women's safety. "There's not much left to return to," he said finally. "The house still stands, but the barn is gone, along with most of my livestock." "You could rebuild," Catherine suggested. "I could." But the prospect held little appeal. The isolated ranch had been his refuge from the world, from human connection, from the pain of his loss. Now it felt like a prison he had constructed for himself. Catherine let the word hang between them. "Or? Whispering Pines has no physician," she pointed out. "The nearest doctor is in Laramie, 2 days' ride in good weather." Nathaniel stared at her. "You think I should practice medicine again? Here?" "I think you already are practicing again," Catherine said gently. "You saved Elizabeth from fever. You tended Clara's injuries. Your hands remember their purpose, even if you tried to forget." Nathaniel set down his cup, suddenly restless. It's not that simple. Later that morning, Nathaniel found Abigail alone on the porch, watching the snow with unusual stillness. "Elizabeth is sleeping," he said, leaning against the railing beside her. "She'll be fine now." Abigail nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant mountains. "You saved her, with your doctor things." "I just helped her body fight the fever," Nathaniel corrected gently. "She's strong, your sister." "Not like me," Abigail said, a complex emotion crossing her face. "I'm strong outside. Lizzie's strong inside." Nathaniel considered this. Different kinds of strength, both necessary. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Abigail reached into her pocket and withdrew something small, holding it out to Nathaniel. A carved wooden horse, its details worn smooth by small fingers. "Pa made this for me," she said. "It's my good luck charm. I want you to hold it. Just until we're safe." She swallowed hard. "So you have to stay safe too, to give it back." Nathaniel understood what the gesture cost her. This child who'd lost everything once already. He accepted the tiny horse with appropriate solemnity. "I'll keep it safe," he promised, "and you'll get it back." Abigail nodded once sharply, then turned and went back inside. But something had shifted between them. A fragile thread of trust spun across the chasm of her fear. "Few worthwhile things are." Catherine's dark eyes were kind but unflinching. "Your wife and child are gone, Nathaniel. Nothing will bring them back. But there are people here now who need the gifts you were given." Her words struck him with the force of truth plainly spoken. He had been hiding for 5 years, not just from others, but from himself, from his calling. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Catherine nodded, apparently satisfied. "Of course, but don't think too long. Spring will be here before you know it." Morning brought clear skies and bitter cold. The town buzzed with activity as people prepared for the circuit judge's arrival. Trials were infrequent events in small settlements like Whispering Pines, and when they involved prominent citizens like Maxwell Pierce, they became community spectacles. Clara dressed carefully in a borrowed dress of Catherine's, altered hastily the night before to fit her slighter frame. She wore her hair arranged to partially conceal the affected side of her face, though Nathaniel noted she held her head higher than the day before. The twins, too, had been outfitted in clean dresses from Catherine's stock. Elizabeth's eyes shone with excitement, but Abigail looked nervous, fidgeting with her collar. "Will I have to tell them what I saw?" she asked Clara. "About Uncle Maxwell pushing Pa?" Clara knelt before her daughter. "Only if the judge asks you directly," she promised. "Sheriff Sullivan and Dr. Morgan will speak first. Your testimony may not be needed at all." This seemed to reassure Abigail slightly. She straightened her shoulders, visibly composing herself. "Remember," Clara told both girls, "you've done nothing wrong. You're brave, good children, and I'm so proud of you." They made their way to the town hall, a modest clapboard building that served as church, school, and courthouse as needed. Already a crowd had gathered, parting silently to let them pass. Some faces showed sympathy, others suspicion, but none dared speak directly to Clara or her family. Inside, the hall had been arranged with rows of benches facing a raised platform where a large desk awaited the judge. Sheriff Sullivan stood near the front, conferring quietly with a tall, distinguished man in a black coat. "Judge Wilson," Sullivan said as they approached, "may I present Mrs. Clara Fletcher, her daughters Abigail and Elizabeth, her sister Miss Catherine Chen, and Dr. Nathaniel Morgan." Judge Emmett Wilson was a lean, weathered man with keen eyes and silver hair. He nodded to each of them in turn. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I've reviewed Sheriff Sullivan's preliminary report. You've endured a terrible ordeal." "Thank you, Your Honor," Clara replied carefully. "We seek only justice for my husband and safety for my children." "Justice is why I'm here," Wilson assured her, "and the territorial governor takes these matters very seriously. The rule of law must apply equally to men like Maxwell Pierce as to anyone else." As he spoke, the door opened to admit Vernon Cobb, escorted by two soldiers. The scarred man looked diminished somehow, his usual swagger replaced by a subdued wariness. Behind him came an elegantly dressed older woman Nathaniel didn't recognize. She moved with rigid dignity, her face a mask of contained fury. "Mrs. Pierce," Sullivan murmured to Nathaniel, "Maxwell's wife, just arrived from Cheyenne." Judge Wilson called the proceedings to order, and the crowd settled onto the benches. Clara and her family were seated at the front, Nathaniel beside them. Across the aisle sat Mrs. Pierce, alone and straight-backed. The testimony began with Sheriff Sullivan recounting the events of the previous days, including Cobb's confession and the confrontation at the Fletcher homestead. Nathaniel followed, describing his discovery of the starving, neglected children and the subsequent events. Throughout, Mrs. Pierce sat motionless, her expression giving away nothing. Only when Clara took the stand did the widow's composure crack slightly, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. Clara spoke clearly despite her impairment, describing Josiah's discovery of gold, Pierce's attempts to acquire the mine cheaply, and finally her eyewitness account of the murder. "He struck me with his walking stick," she said, pointing to the drooping side of her face. "The last thing I remember was falling, bleeding, while Maxwell stood over me." "Yet you survived," Judge Wilson observed. "By God's grace and the kindness of strangers," Clara confirmed. "The sisters at St. Mary's Convent saved my life and helped me recover my memories and speech." "And these documents," Wilson continued, holding up the papers from the tin box, "you believe they prove your husband's mine contained gold, not just silver as publicly known?" "The assayer's report confirms it," Clara said. $68,000 worth, at minimum. More than enough motive for murder. Mrs. Pierce rose suddenly. "This is preposterous," she declared. "My husband was a respected businessman, a pillar of the community. This woman is clearly deranged from her injury." Judge Wilson fixed her with a stern gaze. "Mrs. Pierce, you will have your opportunity to speak. Until then, please remain seated." The widow subsided, but her eyes burned with hatred as she stared at Clara. Vernon Cobb's testimony followed, reluctant but damning. He confirmed Clara's account of Pierce's actions, admitted to burning Nathaniel's barn on Pierce's orders, and described Pierce's increasingly desperate behavior as he feared exposure. "He wasn't always like that," Cobb concluded, his scarred face troubled. "Leastways, I didn't think so. But the mine, the gold, it changed him, made him forget who he was." "Or revealed who he truly was," Judge Wilson suggested. When all testimony had been heard, the judge called a brief recess to consider his findings. The crowd spilled outside, talking excitedly among themselves. Clara remained seated, looking suddenly exhausted. "You did wonderfully," Nathaniel assured her, offering his handkerchief as she wiped away tears of fatigue. "It's almost over," she whispered, "for better or worse." Before Nathaniel could respond, Mrs. Pierce approached, her path clearing as townspeople stepped aside. "Mrs. Fletcher," she said coldly, "I would speak with you, privately." Clara straightened, meeting the older woman's gaze steadily. "Anything you wish to say can be said here, Mrs. Pierce." The widow's nostrils flared slightly. Very well. I want you to know that I don't believe a word of your testimony. Maxwell was a good man, a generous man. He would never have harmed his own cousin. Yet he did, Clara replied simply. I saw it with my own eyes. The ravings of a brain-damaged woman, Mrs. Pierce hissed. You've destroyed my husband's reputation, ruined my standing in society. Your husband destroyed himself when he chose greed over family, Clara interrupted, her voice firm despite her fatigue. I take no pleasure in your pain, Mrs. Pierce, but justice for Josiah must be served. For a moment it seemed the widow might strike Clara. Then surprisingly she crumpled, her aristocratic facade breaking to reveal raw grief beneath. He was going to lose everything, she whispered. The bank, our home in Cheyenne, all of it. He said the mine would save us, that Josiah had agreed to sell. She looked up, tears streaming down her powdered cheeks. I never knew, never suspected he would. Clara reached out, hesitantly touching the older woman's arm. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Mrs. Pierce. Whatever Maxwell did, I believe he loved you. The unexpected compassion seemed to undo Mrs. Pierce completely. She covered her face with gloved hands and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. That was generous of you, Nathaniel observed. Clara sighed. She's another victim in all this. Different from us, but still harmed by Maxwell's actions. Judge Wilson reconvened the proceedings sooner than expected. The crowd settled quickly, anticipation thick in the air. Having reviewed all testimony and evidence, Wilson began, I find the following. That Josiah Fletcher was indeed murdered by Maxwell Pierce for financial gain. That Clara Fletcher was subsequently assaulted and left for dead by the same. That Pierce obtained guardianship of the Fletcher children through fraudulent means, knowing their mother was alive. He turned to Clara. Mrs. Fletcher, the court recognizes you as the rightful guardian of your children. The Whispering Pines mine and all associated properties are restored to your ownership as Josiah Fletcher's widow and heir. Clara closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her face. As for Vernon Cobb and the other men involved, Wilson continued, you will be remanded to territorial custody pending a separate trial for your roles in these crimes. Your cooperation thus far will be noted in those proceedings. He surveyed the crowded hall. Let this serve as a reminder that in Wyoming territory, justice applies to all, regardless of wealth or position. This court is adjourned. The tap of his gavel seemed to release a collective breath from the assembled townspeople. Conversation erupted around them, but Nathaniel focused on Clara and her daughters. They embraced tightly, tears flowing freely now that the ordeal was truly over. Catherine joined them, her own eyes glistening. It's done, she said simply. You're free. Free, Clara echoed, the words sounding almost foreign on her tongue. She looked around, seeming dazed by the sudden resolution. What happens now? It was Elizabeth who answered, her small face alight with certainty. Now we go home, she said. All of us. Home? Abigail questioned. The old house? Elizabeth shook her head. No, a new home. By a lake with mountains behind it. She looked up at Nathaniel. Like in Ma's painting. Like in my dream. Clara and Catherine exchanged glances. Then Clara turned to Nathaniel. The gold mine changes everything, she said quietly. We could go anywhere, do anything. California, Catherine guessed, remembering the painting Elizabeth had mentioned. Clara nodded. Josiah always wanted to return there, said it was where he'd been happiest as a young man. She hesitated. It seems fitting to fulfill his dream, now that we can. Nathaniel felt an unexpected pang at the thought of the Fletcher women leaving Wyoming. In just a few short days, they had become strangely important to him, had awakened parts of himself he had thought long dead. When would you go? He asked, keeping his voice neutral. Not until spring, Clara replied. The mountain passes are too dangerous now, and there are arrangements to be made. She glanced meaningfully at the twins, who were now talking excitedly with Catherine about California. Of course, Nathaniel said. You'll need time to settle affairs here. Clara studied his face. You look troubled, Doctor. Not at all, he lied. I'm happy for you and your family. It's a new beginning, well-deserved. Clara seemed about to say more when Sheriff Sullivan approached. Mrs. Fletcher, he said, Judge Wilson would like a word before he departs. about the mine ownership papers. As Clara left with Sullivan, Nathaniel found himself alone with his thoughts. The courtroom was emptying, people returning to their daily lives now that the excitement had concluded. Elizabeth appeared at his side, slipping her small hand into his. "You're sad," she observed. "Not sad," Nathaniel corrected gently. "Just thinking about what comes next." "You think we're leaving you behind," she said with her uncanny perception. "But we're not." Before Nathaniel could respond, Clara returned with Catherine and Abigail. "The judge has formally transferred the mine ownership to me," she announced, "and recommended a banker in Laramie who can help manage the proceeds honestly." "Wonderful news," Catherine said. "We should celebrate." "Yes," Clara agreed. She turned to Nathaniel. "Doctor, Nathaniel, would you join us for dinner tonight? There's something important I'd like to discuss." Her tone gave nothing away, but Elizabeth smiled mysteriously beside him. "I'd be honored," he replied. That evening, Catherine closed her store early and prepared a special meal in her upstairs quarters. The atmosphere was celebratory but tinged with a curious tension that Nathaniel couldn't quite identify. After dinner, while Catherine cleared the dishes with the twins' help, Clara invited Nathaniel to join her by the window. Outside, snow had begun falling again, soft flakes drifting past the lamplight. "I've been thinking about the future," Clara said without preamble. "About California and what it might mean for us." "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," Nathaniel offered. "A fresh start for you and the girls." "Yes," Clara agreed, "but fresh starts can be lonely." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. Her expression was hesitant, vulnerable in a way he hadn't seen before. "What are you saying, Clara?" She took a deep breath. "I'm saying that new beginnings are better when shared with friends. People who understand what you've been through. People you trust." Nathaniel's heart quickened. "Clara, Catherine is coming with us," she continued. "She's already planning to sell the store, but the girls, especially Elizabeth, they've grown so attached to you, and She faltered, then pressed on. "I find myself reluctant to imagine this new life without you in it." Nathaniel was speechless. Of all the possibilities he'd considered for his future, this had never entered his mind. "You're asking me to come to California with you?" he finally managed. "I'm asking you to consider it," Clara clarified, "to think about whether you might find healing there, as we hope to consider whether your skills as a physician might be needed in a growing community." She met his gaze directly. "And yes, to consider whether you might want to be part of our family in whatever capacity feels right to you." "I don't know what to say," Nathaniel admitted. "You don't need to answer now," Clara assured him. "It's a significant decision. But know that the invitation is sincere and it comes from all of us." From the kitchen doorway, Elizabeth called out, "I told you he'd be surprised, Ma." Clara laughed, the sound warming the room. "Yes, you did, dear." Catherine appeared with the twins. "I see you've extended our invitation," she observed. "I have," Clara confirmed, "though I fear I've overwhelmed the good doctor." "Not overwhelmed," Nathaniel corrected, "just surprised, as Elizabeth predicted." Abigail approached, more serious than her sister. "We really do want you to come with us," she said earnestly. "You saved Lizzie when she was sick. You helped us get Ma back. You're family now." "Family," Nathaniel repeated softly, a concept he had thought forever closed to him after Rebecca and their son died. "Think about it," Clara urged. "That's all I ask." Later, alone in the small room Catherine had provided, Nathaniel stood by the window watching the snowfall. His mind was a tumult of conflicting emotions and thoughts. California, a new beginning, with Clara, Catherine, and the twins, a ready-made family offering him a place among them. It seemed too perfect, too much like one of Elizabeth's prophetic dreams rather than the harsh reality he had come to expect from life. And yet, hadn't he already begun to change? Hadn't he used his medical skills again? Felt the satisfaction of healing? Hadn't he connected with these extraordinary women and children in ways he had thought impossible after his loss? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. He opened the door to find Elizabeth in her nightgown, a piece of paper clutched in her hand. "I had another dream," she said without preamble. "I drew it for you." She handed him the paper. On it was a simple but detailed drawing, a cabin beside a lake, mountains rising behind it. In front stood six figures: Clara, Catherine, Abigail, Elizabeth, and Nathaniel. But there was another figure Nathaniel didn't recognize, a woman with long hair standing slightly apart from the others. "Who is this?" he asked, pointing to the unknown woman. "Rebecca," Elizabeth said softly. "Your wife. She was in my dream too." Nathaniel's throat constricted. "Elizabeth, she's happy, doctor," the child continued earnestly. "She told me to tell you that she's happy where she is and that it's time for you to be happy too." Tears welled in Nathaniel's eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. Did she really say that?" Elizabeth nodded solemnly. "She said you've carried the ice long enough, that it's time for spring." She stood on tiptoe to kiss his cheek, then slipped away down the hall, leaving Nathaniel with the drawing and a heart both broken and somehow healing. All at once, the days that followed took on a dreamlike quality. The news of Pierce's death and Clara's vindication spread throughout the region, bringing curious visitors to Whispering Pines despite the bitter winter weather. Clara handled the attention with quiet dignity, neither hiding her injury nor allowing it to define her. With Judge Wilson's help, she navigated the legal complexities of reclaiming Josiah's estate and preparing for their eventual move to California. Nathaniel found himself increasingly involved in these preparations. Almost without conscious decision, he began examining patients who sought him out, first in Catherine's back room, then in a small office space she cleared in her storeroom. Word spread quickly that a skilled physician had taken up practice in Whispering Pines. People came with winter ailments, old injuries, chronic conditions long neglected due to the distance to Laramie. "You've found your calling again," Catherine observed one evening as she helped him organize his growing collection of medical supplies. "Perhaps," Nathaniel allowed, "though I'm not certain how useful these skills will be in California." Catherine smiled knowingly. "People fall ill everywhere, doctor, even in paradise." He had not yet given Clara an answer about joining them, though the departure date grew closer with each passing day. February gave way to March, and the first subtle signs of spring began to appear. Longer daylight hours, occasional thaws that revealed patches of ground beneath the snow. One crisp morning, Nathaniel rose early and walked to the edge of town. The eastern sky was lightening, promising a clear day ahead. On impulse, he continued walking, following the road that led to his abandoned ranch. He hadn't returned since the day of Pierce's death, hadn't seen what remained of his isolated home of 5 years. The journey took several hours, but the exercise felt good, clearing his mind of the indecision that had plagued him. When he crested the final rise and looked down at the ranch, he stopped in surprise. Where he had expected to find his house standing alone amidst the burned ruins of the barn, he saw activity, men working, a new structure rising from the ashes. Confused, he hurried down the slope. As he approached, one of the workers spotted him and called out, "Dr. Morgan, just the man we wanted to see." It was Tom Wheeler, the blacksmith from Whispering Pines, who had apparently traded his forge for a carpenter's hammer for the day. "Tom, what's happening here?" Nathaniel demanded. "Town effort," Wheeler explained, gesturing to the half-built barn. "After what you did for the Fletcher women in exposing Pierce's scheme, well, folks wanted to show their appreciation." Nathaniel stared at the dozen or so men working on the structure. Some he recognized from town, others were strangers to him. "This isn't necessary," he began, but Wheeler cut him off. "It's already decided. Sheriff Sullivan organized it. Said you might be planning to leave come spring, but a man should have something to come back to, or something to sell proper like, if he chooses." Nathaniel was speechless. After 5 years of deliberate isolation, the community he had held at arm's length had come together for him. "Besides," Wheeler continued with a grin, "my wife would skin me alive if I didn't help. Says your tonic for her rheumatism is the only thing that lets her sleep through the night." Nathaniel spent the day working alongside the men, sharing the noon meal they had brought, listening to their stories and concerns. By sunset, the barn's frame was complete, the roof half shingled. "We'll be back tomorrow to finish," Wheeler promised as the men gathered their tools. "And the day after, we're bringing livestock to replace what you lost. Nothing fancy, but enough to get a man started again." "I don't know how to thank you," Nathaniel said, genuinely moved. Wheeler shrugged. "Just keep doctoring folks who need it, wherever you end up." That night, Nathaniel stayed in his old cabin. The interior was cold and musty from months of disuse, but the structure itself was sound. He built a fire in the hearth and sat before it, contemplating the unexpected turn his life had taken. 5 years ago, he had come to this isolated spot to die slowly, to punish himself for failing to save Rebecca and their son. He had built walls around his heart, as solid as those of the cabin, believing they would protect him from further pain. But walls that kept pain out also kept healing out. It had taken two desperate little girls stealing horse feed to begin the process of breaking down those barriers. Ice don't break itself. The phrase came back to him, weighted with new meaning. He had been frozen for so long, trapped in grief and guilt. But the ice was melting now, thawed by the warmth of human connection. With Clara and her daughters, with Catherine, with the community that had rallied to rebuild his barn. By dawn, Nathaniel had made his decision. He tidied the cabin, closing it up properly, then began the walk back to town with a lighter heart than he had known in years. When he arrived at Catherine's store, he found Clara and the girls in the back room, sorting through possessions in preparation for their journey. Elizabeth spotted him first, her face lighting up with that knowing smile. "You've decided," she exclaimed. Clara and Abigail looked up, identical expressions of hope and uncertainty on their faces. "Yes," Nathaniel said simply. "If your offer still stands, I would be honored to join you in California." The joy that bloomed on Clara's face was answer enough. Abigail cheered, while Elizabeth merely nodded as if confirming something she had known all along. "What changed your mind?" Clara asked when the initial excitement had settled. Nathaniel thought of the rebuilt barn, of Wheeler's words, of the drawing Elizabeth had made showing Rebecca's spirit blessing their new beginning. "I realize that holding on to grief doesn't honor those we've lost," he said. "Living fully, helping others, finding joy again, that's how we truly remember them." Clara's eyes glistened with understanding. "Yes," she said softly, "that's exactly it." April arrived with warming days and nights still cold enough to frost the windows. The snow retreated gradually, revealing mud, and then, finally, tender green shoots pushing through the thawing earth. The day of departure dawned clear and mild. 2 wagons waited outside Catherine's store, one loaded with their belongings, the other with supplies for the long journey west. The mine had been sold to a Denver company for a sum that ensured the Fletcher family would never want for anything material again. Half the town gathered to see them off. Sheriff Sullivan presented Clara with a letter of introduction to the territorial marshal in California. Mrs. Pierce, surprisingly, came to offer a stiff but sincere wish for their happiness. Even Judge Wilson had returned to Whispering Pines to bid them farewell. "You've certainly left your mark on this community, Dr. Morgan," the judge observed. "People are already lamenting the loss of their physician." "There will be others," Nathaniel replied. "The railroad's coming. The territory is growing." "True enough," Wilson agreed, "but a good doctor is remembered long after he's gone." He offered his hand. "Safe travels to you and your family." The word gave Nathaniel pause. Family. Yes, that's what they had become, he and Clara, Catherine and the twins. An unlikely family forged through shared adversity and mutual respect, bound together by choice rather than merely blood. As they prepared to depart, Elizabeth insisted on one final ritual. She led them all to the edge of town, to a small pond where ice still lingered in the shadow portions. "We need to break the ice one last time," she declared, "all of us together." Catherine produced a small hatchet from her bag. "I thought you might say that," she told her niece with a smile. One by one, they took turns breaking the remaining ice. First Clara, then Catherine, then the twins. Finally, the hatchet passed to Nathaniel. "For Rebecca and your son," Elizabeth whispered as he took it, "to say goodbye properly." Nathaniel swung the hatchet, feeling the ice crack beneath the blade. With each blow, something inside him shifted, not breaking but transforming, changing shape as Clara had described grief doing. When he finished, they stood together at the pond's edge, watching as the fractured ice began to drift apart, revealing clear water beneath. "Ice don't break itself," Nathaniel said, the familiar phrase now a benediction rather than a burden. "You have to show up every day." "And we will," Clara promised, her good hand finding his, together. As they returned to the wagons and began their journey west, Nathaniel took one last look at Whispering Pines. at the place where he had lost himself and then, unexpectedly, found himself again. Ahead lay California, a new home by a lake with mountains rising behind it, just as in Elizabeth's drawing. Ahead lay challenges and joys he couldn't yet imagine, a future unfolding like the road before them. And within him, where ice had encased his heart for 5 long years, he felt the unmistakable warmth of spring. 3 months later, the cabin stood beside a lake so blue it seemed to mirror the California sky. Behind it, mountains rose in purple majesty, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer warmth. Before it, a garden of wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, planted by Clara and the twins when they first arrived. On the wide porch, Nathaniel Morgan sat in a handcrafted rocking chair, medical journal open on his lap, though his gaze had drifted to the scene before him. At the lake's edge, Elizabeth was teaching Catherine to skip stones, their laughter carrying on the gentle breeze. Nearby, Clara tended a small herb garden, the movements of her once damaged side noticeably smoother now, her speech almost completely restored. From inside the cabin came the sound of Abigail practicing her reading aloud, preparing for the school term that would begin in the fall. The local settlement had welcomed a physician with open arms, providing the cabin and land in exchange for Nathaniel's services. Already his reputation was growing. The doctor with golden hands, people called him, unknowingly echoing Elizabeth's words. A stone skipped 7 times across the water's surface, bringing cheers from Elizabeth and Catherine. Clara looked up, catching Nathaniel's eye, and smiled. A smile that spoke of healing, of hope, of home found rather than merely built. Nathaniel returned the smile, feeling the fullness of the moment. The journal on his lap contained his first medical observations in years, notes on local herbs and treatments he was learning from both Catherine's Chinese knowledge and the native healers in the area. He was practicing medicine again, but differently now, with humility born from failure, with wisdom earned through suffering. In the distance, the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the landscape in gold. Soon they would gather for dinner, sharing stories of the day and plans for tomorrow. They would speak of the mine proceeds that had allowed them this new beginning, of the town growing nearby, of the letters received from Sullivan and the others back in Wyoming. And then, as shadows lengthened and stars appeared, Nathaniel would sit with Elizabeth on the porch as had become their custom, listening to her dreams and visions, no longer afraid of what she might see, but curious about the future still unfolding before them all. Ice don't break itself. You have to show up every day. He had, they all had, and in doing so they had found not just spring, but the full warmth of summer, a season of growth, of abundance, of life renewed.